That night, when the walls of Ulster Castle were filled with muffled groans, Duke William de Burgh himself lay on a straw mattress, uninhibited in his urges. His fat-scarred chest was in the arms of a village woman who hadn't even been allowed near the barnyard because of the stench, and now this Graine, unwashed since last year, greedily grabbed him, leaving murky, sticky marks on her skin. No covers, no decorum, only steam and animal thirst. Her hair was matted into putrid tangles. A yellowish stream of sweat ran down her back, and the remains of food darkened her teeth. It was April 1325, the date the Duke signed his own death warrant, abandoning caution for a moment of lust, when in the midst of rough lovemaking, Grenna suddenly bit into his left nipple and tugged hard. William howled not in pain, but in humiliation. Blood immediately appeared on his skin, running into the thick fur on his chest. She laughed, and, releasing the nipple, shouted loudly across the room that a piece of the master will now bring her good luck and power over all the castle servants. The very next morning, as the Duke tried to cover the wound with a piece of dirty linen, gossip spread throughout the kitchen that the new mistress had bitten off William's very flesh, and now there would be no peace in Ulster. William tried to act as if nothing was wrong. He'd go out to breakfast, pulling a thick doublet over his shirt, as if he feared even the slightest breath of wind. But his nipple swelled. The skin around it turned an ominous blue. And that night, when he finally dared to look in the mirror, he saw the edges of the wound glistening with a sticky residue. The shame was so intense that even the mere sight of the wound made him want to smash the glass and hide. He sprinkled the bite site generously with wheat flour, hoping it would prevent the blood from bleeding through his clothes. By lunchtime on April 3rd, the pain had intensified. His nipple had become engorged, and a cloudy ichor had begun to ooze from it. Every time he touched his breast, his fingers remained damp. William grew increasingly irritated, snapping at the servants, who merely exchanged glances and covered their noses with their sleeves. That evening, when he tried to remove his shirt, a crust of dried blood clung to the fabric, along with the first unpleasant smell of decay. One of the servants placed a broom of wormwood under his door, whispering, "Let the herbs at least mask the stench." By April 4th, things had gotten really bad. The pain had turned into a burning itch. The nipple had swollen and begun oozing a cloudy, yellowish fluid. Fearing ridicule and suspicion, the Duke wore another rag under his clothes, and at night he smeared his chest thickly with goose fat mixed with manure, allegedly according to an ancient recipe. But neither the fat nor the herbs helped. The smell intensified, spreading through the corridors. Jokes about the Duke's chest quickly spread throughout the castle and downstairs among the kitchen staff. The latest tale was already being told. Ulster no longer has breasts, but a swamp. By April 8th, 1325, the Duke could no longer hide the pain or the stench. His nipples had swollen to absurd proportions. The cloth on his chest left dark stains, and when William tried to change the cloth, he vomited from his own odor. Even the guard dogs tried to stay away from him, howling at night, and the maids placed bunches of dried nettles under his door. William himself was most afraid that the disgrace would become public knowledge, but rumors had already spread beyond the castle walls. It all started with one night, one bite, one humiliation, and from there, it only got worse. With each passing day, the putrefactive process spread to new areas of William de Burgh's body. As early as April 9th, 1325, immediately after another sleepless night, he noticed that the spots on his chest had begun to spread across the skin, and soft, painful swellings had formed around his nipples. With every movement, his shirt clung to his chest, leaving dark stains and an unpleasant, sour residue on the fabric. The smell emanating from it gradually permeated the chambers. Now, even in the back rooms, servants were breathing through rags soaked in vinegar. The doctor, summoned to the castle for the first time on April 11th, hesitated to approach the Duke immediately. He sensed a sweet, putrid odor from a distance, nearly fainting. An examination revealed that the edges of the nipples had been eroded to a yellowish-green mass, and a turbid, thick liquid was leaking from a central fissure. Following the advice of old chronicles, the physician prepared a compress of sauerkraut and horse manure infusion. The mixture was applied directly to the inflamed areas, secured with dirty bandages, which by the end of the day had absorbed so much mucus that they had to be burned in the castle's backyard. That same day, April 11th, the Duke's condition worsened. His nipples swelled to the size of walnuts. the surrounding skin turned black, and the lacerations constantly oozed pus with a sharp, ammonia-like tint. All attempts to conceal the damage proved futile. The bandages swelled and adhered to his body, and attempts to remove them left a bloody surface, sometimes with chunks of skin. Every step caused William acute pain. He began moving slowly, hunching over, and hiding his chest under several layers of clothing, which became saturated with foul-smelling moisture within hours. On April 13th, 1325, the smell reached its peak. Even the castle's stone walls couldn't contain the stench, which now not only spread through every corridor, but also permeated the reception halls. One of the pages, tasked with changing the linens, didn't dare enter, simply tossing the clean linens by the door. That same day, when William attempted to get out of bed for the first time in a week and walk to the window, he was overcome by weakness. His head spun, his vision blurred, his body became limp and sluggish. Every attempt to inhale deeply brought on gagging, and the wet bandages left a sticky trail. Meanwhile, the situation inside the chambers was becoming critical. All surfaces around the Duke's bed were stained with dark yellow and gray spots, and drops of mucus appeared in places on the floor, clinging to straw and dirt. The bed had to be changed 3 or 4 times a day, but even fresh sheets became saturated with pus and an unpleasant odor within minutes. Swarms of small flies gathered in the corners of the room, undeterred by either the smoking herbs or the burning tufts of wormwood. On April 15, 1325, despite the servants' best efforts, the infection continued to spread. The skin on his chest and sides turned purple-gray, covered in small ulcers, the edges of which fused into purulent bands. The Duke experienced constant itching and burning, finding no rest, day or night. The bandages, removed each evening, were immediately thrown into the fire, but the smell of decay lingered in the rooms long after cleaning. Complications were also affecting the Duke's general condition. He developed severe headaches, his fever persisted, and his face took on a sickly yellow hue. Constant exhaustion had caused him to lose his appetite, barely touching food, and he was rapidly losing weight and becoming weaker. The servants assigned to care for him were already looking for excuses to avoid these foul-smelling chambers, passing the assignments off to one another and inventing illnesses. Rumors soon spread among the castle's inhabitants. Whereas the Duke had once been feared and respected, he was now referred to as nothing less than the rotting breast of Ulster. Everyone understood that the disease had already spiraled out of control, and nothing could stop its rapid and vile progression. By mid-month, the decomposition had ceased to be a localized problem and had become a generalized deterioration of the body. By April 17, 1325, the inflammation had spread deeper, beneath the skin and muscle layers of the chest. The surface no longer looked simply inflamed. It had become uneven, lumpy, with areas where the skin had thinned and sunken inward, like soggy tissue. A viscous liquid constantly leaked from these areas, changing color from yellow to gray-green. The smell no longer resembled ordinary decay. It had become sweetish metallic, sticky and corrosive, as if it had ingrained to the very stone of the walls. William de Burgh's body began to lose shape. His chest appeared deformed, his shoulders sagged, and his posture completely vanished. He walked with short, careful steps, trying not to let his chest bounce, as any sudden movement caused sharp pain and increased the fluid leakage. Beneath the bandages, the skin was constantly corroding, and where the fabric had been in contact with his body for too long, dark streaks of necrosis appeared. Some areas became cold, to the touch, as if the circulation had stopped. On April 20th, 1325, her condition worsened sharply. Her chest began to twitch involuntarily, as if the muscles were contracting without her consent. These spasms were accompanied by an increased discharge of pus, which flowed down her abdomen and accumulated in the folds of her skin. Her body became sticky, covered in a thin film that was impossible to remove, even with frequent changes of linen. The air in her chambers became heavy and viscous. Breathing left her throat scratchy, and the candles burned unevenly, as if reacting to the vapors. The infection gradually spread to surrounding tissue. The armpits swelled. The skin in these areas turned a dark purple hue and became painful. Dense lumps appeared, slowly growing larger and warmer. Deep cracks began to form on the chest, oozing a thicker, almost pasty mass. Sometimes this crusted over, but as soon as the body moved, the crust would burst, revealing a moist, corroded surface. April 23, 1325, the the Duke was practically paralyzed. His strength was sapped by a persistent fever. His body trembled, his skin became dry and dull, and his lips were chapped. The stench of decay followed him everywhere, clinging to his hair, beard, and clothes. Even clean fabrics lost their freshness within minutes and became saturated with a heavy stench. The surface of his bed was stained with stains of varying colors and thicknesses, impossible to completely remove. Signs of general poisoning appeared. His face had become haggard, his eyes had grown dull, and his gaze had become wandering. At times he would break out in a cold sweat. Then the fever would return. His chest appeared as a single inflamed mass, without clear boundaries, without healthy areas, with patches of blackening where the skin had begun to peel away in thin flaps. Beneath them, a damp, grainy surface emerged, oozing a continuous stream of fluid. By this point, it was clear the process had spread beyond control. The decomposition wasn't simply destroying tissue. It was transforming the body itself, turning it into a source of constant infection. Odor, pain, and physical weakness were no longer temporary symptoms. They had become a permanent condition in which the Duke existed, slowly losing his humanity and approaching a point beyond which there was no turning back. The first days of May 1325 brought with them a feeling that the castle walls had become tighter and the air heavier. Neither the Duke himself nor the few servants forced to tend his rotting body ever left his chambers. Everything William touched became a source of infection. Doorknobs became coated with a murky slime, and even the strongest infusions of ash and herbs no longer washed clean. On May 2nd, when dark drops were first noticed on the stone floor in the corridors, it became clear that the decomposition was not limited to his chest. The Duke's chest was now a single purple-gray patch, covered in ulcers with patches of blackened, peeling skin visible between them. The dampness never subsided day or night. The rags, which were changed almost hourly, immediately became stained with pus, quickly sticking together and clinging to the wounds. William couldn't lie on his back. The fluid instantly soaked the entire bed, causing excruciating itching and burning. He slept half-sitting, propped up by pillows, but even then, every minute was a trial. The pus trickled down his sides, pooled in the folds of his armpits, causing painful irritation. On May 5th, 1325, the smell became so overwhelming that all attempts to ventilate the rooms failed. All the windows were open, the doors were left wide open, but the air quickly became damp, heavy, and thick with stench. Even bundles of resin and flaming baskets of dried wormwood burned at the head of the bed brought no relief. The fabric on the furniture around the bed was covered in stains of varying colors, from yellow-gray to dark red, reminiscent of spilled wine. The Duke's body temperature barely dropped. Weakness became a constant companion, and his movements slowed to a crawl. He could barely lift his hand to brush the hair stuck to his forehead, and attempts to change his shirt ended in a semi-conscious state of weakness. His face had taken on an ashen hue. Deep circles appeared under his eyes, and his lips were chapped. Constant thirst and fluid loss made him drink more, but he could barely keep the water down. His stomach refused to function. By May 9th, 1325, the infection had reached a new stage. Large blisters filled with a cloudy fluid appeared in the armpits, the skin over them thinning to the point of translucency. Some of them burst spontaneously, leaving behind abrasions and purulent wounds, from which drops of mucus flowed directly onto the floor. Despite all efforts, swarms of flies gathered around the room. There were so many that at dawn the ceiling and walls were covered in a dark, shifting carpet to somehow contain the spread of the infection. The servants sprinkled the floors with lime, but even this did not stop the smell from permeating the lower floors. The constant moisture and decay caused the destruction of other tissues as well. Ulcers began to appear on the sides of his chest, closer to the ribs, rapidly deepening, growing wider and deeper. Their edges peeled away, revealing a loose, almost granular mass. The Duke felt not only a burning sensation, but also a terrible itching, and in places complete numbness, as if the tissue there no longer belonged to a living body. Even the lightest touches caused bleeding and a new wave of pain. During the days when the condition reached its peak, with his temperature never dropping below 39 degrees Celsius, 102.4 degrees Fahrenheit, William became unresponsive to his surroundings. He lost his sense of time. He no longer differentiated between morning and evening light. Food was barely digested, and every swallow was accompanied by a spasm in his throat. A thick coating developed on his tongue, and his breathing became hoarse with prolonged pauses. On May 12, 1325, new purple spots appeared on his neck and shoulders. The skin in these areas thinned, became loose, and sometimes even separated from the underlying tissue. The Duke constantly felt his body disintegrating, his internal organs no longer able to resist. Bloody discharge became common, and each time the rags were removed, pieces of dead tissue remained. Everything that had once been a sign of status and power had vanished. The Duke's bed was now covered in a thick layer of sheets and absorbent rags, around which swarms of insects gathered. Pain, burning, itching, and a constant feeling of slime became his only surroundings. The castle had become an isolated fount of stench, where every minute became a new torment. During this period, even the most devoted servants tried to leave his chambers as quickly as possible, and no one could hope for a miracle. The illness, which had begun as a localized infection, was now eating away at the Duke's body and personality, stripping him of the last vestiges of humanity. By mid-May 1325, no one in Ulster Castle believed the Duke's recovery was possible. William de Burgh's body had entered an irreversible phase. On May 15th, dark marks were left wherever servants passed with the next batch of linen, and every breath near the chambers was a reminder that life had departed, leaving behind decay. The damp, sticky sheets, changed several times a night, only reinforced the feeling that the process of deterioration was accelerating with each passing day. The Duke's chest had become a bloated, inflamed mass. In places, blood blisters appeared beneath the skin, soon bursting, leaving behind bloody brown bald patches and soaking everything in a thick, sticky substance. On May 17th, a new wave of pus began to ooze from the armpits and sides of his chest, this time thick with a distinctly sweet, putrid odor, as if the entire chest had become one spreading abscess. Any touch to these areas was accompanied by the separation of new flaps of skin, revealing weeping ulcers. The muscles disintegrated, and the body lost its former shape. The shoulders sagged, the neck became visibly shorter, and the head itself seemed to be sinking into the inflamed tissue. The constant fever persisted, lasting for days, and the lips and fingertips took on a blue tint. By May 19th, fluid from the wounds not only flowed down the sides but also accumulated on the abdomen, forming sticky puddles. Every movement became torture. Even the slightest strain on the chest muscles resulted in sharp pain and another wave of purulent discharge. At the same time, new complications arose. The peeling skin was joined by deep cracks reaching the muscles. Mucus and blood constantly leaked, hardening on the sheets as yellowish-brown crusts. The ulcers widened, and some sections of the fabric literally fell off in chunks, leaving gaping, wet holes. Even a short stay by the servants in the Duke's chambers resulted in clothes becoming saturated with a stench that could not be aired out or washed. The loss of blood and fluids was accompanied by a sharp decline in vitality. The Duke could no longer stand or sit on his own. His body was literally sinking into rotting rags. His face became gaunt, hollowed cheeks developed, and his eyes became glassy, their gaze wandering and lost. Each passing hour brought new signs of decomposition. His temperature dropped sharply and then rose again. His hands and feet periodically grew cold, and his breathing became shallow and intermittent. On May 21st, 1325, the agony began. For 24 hours, William's body was racked by convulsions. The muscles of his chest and abdomen spasmed, sometimes straining to the limit, then completely limp. His heartbeat became rapid, sometimes barely noticeable. A new wave of pus simultaneously flowed from all the wounds and ulcers, pouring in streams, soaking the bed and dripping onto the floor. The skin on his chest blistered and then burst in several places. The sheets that had been used to cover William immediately stuck to the torn ulcers and tore off, along with pieces of dead tissue. As the night of May 22nd approached, his body temperature dropped so low that his extremities became mottled. Blood flowed from cracks in his chest and shoulders, staining everything crimson black. The Duke's vision clouded over, and wheezing and gurgling sounds appeared in his throat. His heartbeat slowed, and his breathing became ragged, with long pauses. The final hours of his life were filled with excruciating pain, cramps, and a terrible sensation of his body falling apart. May 23rd, 1325, marked the culmination of decomposition and death from early morning. A pungent odor permeated the castle, thick, heavy, and throat-crushing. By midday, the Duke's chest literally exploded. The skin, along the old wounds, finally broke, and a thick wave of pus, mixed with blood, spilled onto the floor with a squelching sound. The bed became a mass of gray-yellow and crimson stains. The servants, unable to bear the sight, abandoned the chambers, and the Duke's body remained on the stench-soaked bed, from which the last vestiges of life evaporated. The cleansing of the chambers after his death lasted over a week. All fabrics, furniture, and personal belongings were burned, and the walls were washed with decoctions and strong vinegar. The castle lingered for a long time, tainted by the odor that had permeated the stone. The chronicles omitted the details of his death, and the page describing the end of the Duke's life was deliberately torn out so that no one would ever again recall the shame and horror that had devoured Ulster to its core.